spotless crime scene, but the blood was never found. Welcome to Mystery Parlor. I am your host, Axon. Let's connect. Drop a comment and share where you're tuning in from today. Hearing from you all makes each mystery feel even more alive. Let's dive in. You could say I'm not a man given to poetic introspection, but there's something about a morning when the smell of lemon oil hits your nose at the exact moment Fritz serves you scrambled eggs that makes you sit up and wonder if fate's about to yank your tie. That's how it started. Lemon oil and trouble. I was halfway through breakfast, indulging in my sacred right to peace and yolk, when I heard the front door creak open and close. That wasn't supposed to happen. We have rules about unexpected visits, mostly that they're not welcome until Wolfe says so. I stepped into the hallway, napkin still in hand, and saw her standing there, holding a handbag like it might bite. She was in her late 20s with a spotless gray uniform, polished black shoes, and a face that didn't look like it had ever cracked a joke. A maid, no doubt, but too poised, too still. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice clipped, but not cold. The door was ajar. That was a lie. I know that door. It wasn't ajar. I gave her a polite version of the look I usually reserve for burglars and politicians. "Lady, you've got exactly 30 seconds to explain who you are, who you're here to see, and why you didn't ring the bell like a civilized person." She hesitated. "Then, I'm Florence Avery. I used to work for Mrs. Anita Lovechen. I'm here to see Mr. Wolfe. It's urgent." The name rang a faint bell. Anita Lovechen, society widow, arts patron, and part-time tempest. Wolfe had once called her a woman of incurable taste and incurable interference, which for him was practically a sonnet. "She sent you?" I asked. "No, she's dead." That pulled the brake on my sarcasm train. She added, "Yesterday. It wasn't in the papers yet. I found her. I studied her." Her tone was just off-key enough to make me pause. She wasn't trembling or wringing her hands, but her knuckles were white on that handbag. "Wait here," I said, and climbed the stairs 2 at a time. When I told Wolfe what was downstairs, he didn't blink, but he did open his eyes, which for Nero Wolfe is the equivalent of a cardiac event. He reached for the handkerchief on his desk and dabbed his forehead, not because he was hot, but because he needed a gesture of displeasure. "A maid?" he asked. "She says she found Anita Lovechen dead yesterday, and it wasn't natural. You want to tell her to get lost? Or should I do it in rhyme?" He stared at the ceiling. "Show her in. But if she smells of ammonia, I will be cross." Florence Avery entered like someone accustomed to being invisible. She didn't speak until Wolfe gestured to the red chair. Even then, she waited for it to creak beneath her before beginning. "Mrs. Lovechen died yesterday in her study," she said. "They're calling it a stroke, but it wasn't. She was healthy. I cleaned that house daily. I know what order looks like." Wolfe's brows moved. "That's like another man standing up and shouting." "You object to the diagnosis?" he asked. "I object to what I found," she said. Her teacup was on the floor, not the table. A drawer was open, and the book on her desk. It was the wrong book. Mrs. Lovechen never read fiction before noon. "You expect me," Wolfe said, "to believe you discerned foul play based on reading habits and drawer alignment." She didn't flinch. "I expect you to believe I have eyes." Now, I've seen Wolfe dismiss better cases than this before lunch, but he didn't. He sat very still, which meant his mind was flying like a hawk over a field. "She employed you how long?" he asked. 4 years. Live-in. She paid well, demanded order, and disliked guests, especially family. "War," Wolfe said. The inevitable seed of discord. "Did she have a will?" "Yes. She kept it in the top drawer. It wasn't there yesterday. I'll give the girl credit. She had the poise of a poker dealer and the instincts of a cat in a room full of rocking chairs." "Miss Avery," Wolfe said, folding his fingers under his chin. "Why come to me?" "Because I already went to the police," she said. They nodded politely. and told me to go home, but I cleaned for Mrs. Lovechin. I know when something's been wiped clean too quickly. You don't seem like a man who misses details." Wolfe actually smiled. "Barely, Archie." "Yes, sir. Obtain the obituary pages from the Gazette, Times, and Ledger. Then call Saul Panzer. I wish to know the names of Mrs. Lovechin's known relatives, her attorney, and any visitors in the last 10 days. And Miss Avery. She will remain. Fritz will prepare lunch for her." Florence blinked. That was about as much emotion as she let escape. "And what precisely," Wolfe said, "do you believe happened?" Florence hesitated. "Then I think someone was in that house. I think someone wanted something, and I think they found it after she died." Wolfe closed his eyes, not in dismissal but in thought. "You will stay in New York," he said, "and you will speak to no one else about this. If you agree, I shall look into it. If you don't, the door remains unlocked, but only once." She nodded. When she left the room, Wolfe exhaled long and low. "The dead are silent," he murmured, "but their servants speak volumes." And just like that, we were in it. Lemon oil and all. By the time I made it out the front door and into the sunshine, I had my marching orders and a hunch Wolfe wasn't telling me everything. Not yet. That wasn't unusual. The man collects secrets like orchids, and he doesn't hand them over unless there's leverage involved, or it's time for the big finish. This wasn't either. I stopped by the newsstand on 34th and got copies of the Gazette, Times, and Ledger. None of them had anything on Anita Lovechin yet. Either it really had been called a natural death, or someone had leaned hard to keep it quiet. I made a mental note to call Lon Cohen later, Wolfe's unofficial mole at the Gazette. But first, Saul. Back at the brownstone, I made the call. Saul Panzer, the best free-range bloodhound money can buy, picked up on the second ring. I gave him the rundown. "Lovechin," he said. "Yeah, I've heard the name. Had a house near Riverside Drive, right?" "That's the one." Wolfe wants the usual relatives, enemies, recent guests, the lawyer, and anything that smells like spoiled fish. "You got it. Give me 4 hours." I hung up and headed for the front room, where Florence Avery was sitting in the green armchair, with her back too straight and her knees glued together like she was waiting for a tribunal. Fritz had served her a respectable lunch, cold chicken potato salad, and a glass of chilled mineral water. She hadn't touched it. "I can tell Fritz you're fasting for a cause," I said as I walked in, "but he's liable to take that personally." She looked at me, unreadable. "It's hard to eat when your employer is dead, and nobody seems to care." I nodded, not out of sympathy but acknowledgement. "Fair. But you'll need your energy if Wolfe decides to keep you around. He's not the sort to warm up to house guests unless they're made of bacon fat or yellowtail. I'm not looking to stay. I just want the truth." That made me snort, and I couldn't help it. "Sister, in this town, the truth comes wrapped in red tape and perfume. You might get justice if you're lucky, but it's not always the same thing." She finally picked up the fork. Victory. An hour later, I was in Wolfe's office, flipping through a file I'd dug up on Anita Lovechin. There wasn't much, just some socialite clippings, an art gallery benefit, a minor lawsuit with a distant cousin over property in Connecticut, and a quote in a puff piece where she declared that personal boundaries were like wallpaper. You didn't notice them until they started to peel. Charming. She was a collector, I told Wolfe. People, paintings, grudges. No kids, 2 marriages, both husbands dead, 1 heart attack, 1 car accident in Cannes. She had money more than enough, and no shortage of people orbiting her wallet. Wolfe was in his chair, fingers steepled. "Do we know how recently she altered her will?" "Not yet." Saul's digging. "But Florence claims it was kept in her desk drawer. Yesterday it wasn't there." "That," Wolfe murmured, "is a disturbance." I raised a brow. The missing will or the book being out of place? Both. The average person cannot read character, but anyone who has performed domestic service for 4 years develops a sense for deviations. Miss Avery may be inconveniently exacting, but she is not wrong to notice That was about as close to a compliment as anyone got from him. Just then the bell rang. Fritz answered, and 30 seconds later, we had our first real visitor of the day, aside from Miss Lemon Oil herself. He was tall, thin in the way that suggests you burn through calories lying down, and wore a three-piece suit that was both too expensive and too precise. His nose looked like it had sniffed out contracts before signatures, and his briefcase could have doubled as a coffin for secrets. "I'm Carl Jessup," he said. "I represent the estate of the late Mrs. Anita Lovechin." I led him into the office, where Wolfe gave him one of those slow, syrupy glances that usually means he's deciding how hard he'll need to press. "You're early," Wolfe said. Jessup blinked. "Early for what?" "For the stage at which lawyers tend to appear." Miss Avery must have made haste. That startled him. "Florence came here. She is here now," Wolfe said smoothly. "Under my hospitality and protection." Jessup frowned. "That's unexpected. She's a servant." "No," Wolfe corrected. "She was a servant. Now she is a client, or near enough to qualify." "I see." Jessup looked like he'd bitten into a lemon rind. "Well, as the executor of Mrs. Lovechin's estate, I must inform you that the death certificate is being processed as a natural cause. No suspicion has been raised, nor any irregularities reported." Wolfe tilted his head. "Miss Avery disagrees. She would. Florence has always had a particular relationship with Mrs. Lovechin." "Bordering on obsessive," I interjected. "Care to explain that?" "She was protective, overstepped her role, monitored visitors, once tried to stop a delivery boy because she thought the flowers were too personal." "And was she wrong?" Wolfe asked. Jessup paused. "That told me plenty. She believed Mrs. Lovechin needed shielding from people," Jessup said, "which is ironic, given that she was the one always watching." "Who inherits?" Wolfe asked abruptly. Jessup straightened. "There are several charitable foundations. A niece, Camilla Dean, a gallery director named Paul Renner, minor gifts to former employees, and me, as it happened." "Modesty is not among your burdens," Wolfe murmured. Jessup didn't rise to it. He snapped his case open and took out a copy of the will. "This version is dated 2 months ago. Signed, notarized, filed. I assure you it's legitimate, but not the one Miss Avery claims was kept in the desk. She likely wouldn't have seen this one. Mrs. Lovechin was private about updates. I took the paper and gave it a once-over. Nothing screamed forgery, but I'd seen good ones before. So had Wolfe. When Jessup left, Wolfe leaned back, eyes closed. "We now have tension," he said, "the first ingredient of truth." "And Jessup?" I asked. "Is a man accustomed to managing outcomes. I suspect he has been managing Miss Avery for some time." I was halfway through jotting notes when Florence reappeared in the doorway. Her eyes flicked to the empty glass on Wolfe's desk, like it might offer a message. "I overheard some of that," she said. "Paul Renner and Camilla Dean. They both had reasons to resent her. Wolfe did not scold her for eavesdropping. He merely motioned her in. You will list those reasons in writing. Archie will retrieve the names of the staff, the neighbors, and anyone recently dismissed from employment. Then you will answer a single question." She waited. Wolfe opened his eyes. "Did Mrs. Lovechin trust you?" Florence didn't blink. "Yes." "Good. That may be your most valuable currency." That was Wolfe's way of saying, "We're in the thick of it now." And he was right. We were. The thing about Nero Wolfe is, he never puts his foot outside the brownstone unless the universe itself folds in on Manhattan. But once you put a question in his mind, something askew out of alignment, he moves. Not in the physical sense, not in the way normal mortals do, but the mental gears begin to grind. And once they do, you'd better hope you're not standing in the way, because there's no stopping them until the mystery's wrung dry. That afternoon, the gears were grinding. I knew it from the way he kept asking for details twice, then pretending he hadn't. He wanted this puzzle solved, and he wanted it quickly, but not obviously. He'd never admit Florence Avery had nudged his curiosity, but she had. I went to the front room and found her exactly where I'd left her, with a notepad on her lap and handwriting so small you'd think she was paying by the letter. "Wolfe wants the full roll call," I said. "Everyone who worked at the Lovechen house in the last 6 months. Cleaners, gardeners, errand boys, stray dogs, whatever." She tore out a sheet and handed it to me without blinking. Already listed, full names, job titles, and the days they came by. I glanced down. Sure enough, she'd laid it out in columns, meticulous, clean, almost obsessively so. I whistled low. "You make a hell of a witness." "I make a thorough maid." "Tache." I took the list back upstairs, handed it to Wolfe, and was halfway through reporting when the phone rang. Fritz answered, and within moments he was at the door. "Mr. Panzer," he said, "is here." Wolfe perked up. "Bring him in." Saul came in without ceremony, as always, trench coat hanging open, eyes sharp and unreadable. "Anita Lovechen's estate is a beehive," he began. "Half the art world knew her. Half of them hated her. I spoke with her attorney's clerk, who confirmed that a will was filed 2 months ago. But the clerk also let slip that there were 2 prior drafts. One of them's missing." Wolfe didn't move, but his nostrils flared ever so slightly. It meant he liked what he was hearing. "The niece, Camilla Dean," Saul went on. "She's a jewelry designer, high-end, flashy, and broke. She was seen entering Lovechen's house last Tuesday evening and leaving an hour later looking, quote, agitated. That's from the doorman 2 buildings down." "Why would the doorman notice her?" I asked. "Because she dropped her phone and started swearing in French. I made a note of that." "Colorful." "There's more," Saul said. "Paul Renner, the gallery guy, was in a long-standing argument with Lovechen over a painting she refused to loan for an exhibition in Berlin. And get this, the painting went missing 2 weeks ago. That hit the air like a cork popping off champagne." "Missing?" I asked. Saul nodded. "She told her insurance company it had been misfiled. They flagged it, but she told them to drop it." Wolfe opened his eyes. "And when was this reported?" 5 days before she died." "Then the will is secondary," Wolfe murmured. "We are now dealing with theft. That was a shift. A big one. If something had gone missing, something valuable enough to hide from the insurance company, it could explain the timing of her death, the revised will, and Florence's sense that someone had been in the house." "You think someone killed her for the painting?" I asked. "I think someone was already in the process of stealing from her," Wolfe replied. "Whether that act escalated into murder is another matter. But the scent is there." He motioned to Saul. "I want surveillance on Miss Dean and Mr. Renner. Not crude, discreet. Report back with their movements and meetings." Saul nodded and left without another word. Wolfe steepled his fingers again. "Archie, you will now visit Mrs. Lovechen's house. Miss Avery will accompany you. You will inspect the study, the drawer in question, and determine whether any items have been removed or rearranged." I gave him a look. "You trust her that much?" "I trust her memory and her obsession with detail. It is a rare asset in a witness." Florence was already by the door with her handbag by the time I came down. The woman didn't just anticipate things, she acted like she had the script. We caught a cab to Riverside Drive. The building was the kind of pre-war construction that whispered old money and private secrets. The doorman gave us a wary nod and didn't stop us. Probably figured we were part of some post-mortem cleanup crew. Inside, the apartment was still, too still. You could feel that something had been scooped out of it, like the air hadn't settled since the body had been taken out. Florence led me directly to the study. "She was sitting there," she said quietly, pointing to a high-backed chair behind the desk. "Cup on the carpet, drawer ajar." I surveyed the scene. The drawer was closed now. I opened it. Empty. No stationery. No fountain pen. No signs of dust or indentation. "She didn't keep an empty drawer," Florence murmured. "It was always full. Ledger book, note cards, pens, receipts. All gone." I bent lower. "There's a faint circle on the wood. Look here." Something had been resting there a while. Round. Maybe a tape roll or magnifying glass. Florence looked around the room and moved to the bookcase. That's the book that was out, The Song of the Falcon. She never read mystery fiction before afternoon, and certainly not twice in 1 week. You're telling me the presence of a whodunit on a desk is a red flag? For her? Yes. I stepped back. Maybe she was nuts, or maybe she was the most reliable narrator in the room. Either way, I was starting to feel that Wolfe was right. This wasn't a natural death. Someone had meddled. I checked the windows, latched. No signs of a break-in. But the rug near the fireplace had an edge turned up barely. I crouched and tugged. Beneath it was a dustless square in the hardwood. She used to keep a floor safe here, Florence said. But it was removed a year ago when she had the floor refinished. How do you know? I had to polish around the hole for weeks. We left the apartment just as a lean man in a trench coat and thick glasses was entering from the elevator. He stopped when he saw Florence. Miss Avery. She tensed. Mr. Renner. Ah, so this was Paul Renner. You're not supposed to be here, he said, voice sharp but quiet. This property belongs to the estate now. I'm not taking anything, Florence replied calmly. Just memories. You're not part of the will. No, she said, but I am part of what she left behind. I stepped forward. Archie Goodwin, Nero Wolfe's office. His eyebrows lifted. Wolfe's involved. He is. You just made the update list. Renner muttered something under his breath and shouldered past us. Back in the cab, I gave Florence a look. Did you know he'd be there? No, she said, but I knew he'd be watching. He always circled back when she said no to him. We rode in silence, most of the way back, but when we reached the brownstone and I let her out first, she paused on the steps and said he hated that painting, but he hated being refused even more. I didn't ask which mattered more, because by then I knew the answer. Back in the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, fingers pressed together at the tips in that steeple of contemplation that always reminded me of a man constructing a house of cards with his thoughts. He didn't ask me how the visit went. He didn't need to. He just looked at me once and I knew I was expected to deliver it like a waiter bringing an amuse-bouche to the world's grumpiest gourmand. I gave him everything: the empty drawer, the rug with the dustless patch underneath, the book that didn't belong on the desk, and Paul Renner's sudden appearance like a buzzard circling an inheritance. Florence, for her part, had retreated to the dining room, where Fritz, God bless him, had given her something strong and sweet that looked suspiciously like one of his branded pear tarts. She was calm, but in the way a taut violin string is calm. When I finished, Wolfe was silent for a moment. Then he confronted her. Not exactly, more like he was surprised to see her, and tried to disguise it with a generous dash of condescension. He told her she had no right to be there. She replied with a line that should have been engraved on marble. I got the sense they knew each other better than either of them would like to admit. Did she provoke him? No, but her presence did. He didn't like that she was there uninvited. It messed with his mental blueprint. Wolfe nodded slowly. It confirms one thing. Mr. Renner was not expecting anyone to look closely. He closed his eyes and exhaled through his nose. It was a sound I'd heard before, the quiet exultation of a theory beginning to form. At 4 o'clock, Saul called. Camilla Dean just left a consignment meeting with a jeweler on Madison. She tried to sell 2 loose sapphires, claimed they were personal keepsakes. The clerk stalled her and called the police, but she left before they arrived. I passed the information to Wolfe, who opened one eye like a sleepy dragon, annoyed at a trespasser. Sapphires, he muttered. Anita Lovchin didn't wear sapphires. No? I asked. You've suddenly developed a memory for accessories. She wore only pearls, he replied, and emerald studs on formal occasions. No sapphires. I recall her visit here 3 years ago. She made a point of remarking that sapphires clashed with her complexion. That's a lot of fashion trivia from a man who hasn't changed his shirt in 6 years. Wolfe ignored me. That suggests one of two things. Either Miss Dean is lying about the origin of those stones, or they belong to someone else entirely, possibly part of a concealed asset, perhaps hidden in a missing painting. The air in the room shifted. Even Fritz, who had just come in with Wolfe's afternoon beer, paused for a second. Archie, call the Metropolitan Art Registry. Ask whether Paul Renner has filed any recent insurance claims, or if there are any flagged transactions involving his gallery. Do it obliquely. You'll need to be persuasive. Is that a compliment? No, it is a task. I made the call. The registry wasn't in the habit of giving information to nosy private eyes, but it's amazing what a little fabricated curiosity from a supposed art buyer can do. After a little massaging and a few flourishes, I had what we needed. Renner had filed an insurance inquiry about a painting he claimed was delayed in transit from a private collector. The collector? Anita Lovchin. The reclining figure with veil by a little-known Hungarian symbolist whose work had recently spiked in value after a retrospective in Paris. The value, estimated at $800,000. Wolfe opened his eyes when I said it. That, he said, is a motive. Renner's been circling her estate, I said. He wants something. The will may or may not give it to him. No, Wolfe murmured. He is not waiting to receive. He is waiting to retrieve. He believes something is still hidden. You think he killed her? I think, Wolfe said, that something occurred, perhaps a confrontation. She caught him taking something, or suspected it, and rather than report it, she attempted to alter her will, or hide what remained. Which means, I said, we need to find out who knew about the earlier versions of the will, and who might have helped her change it. Precisely. There was a knock at the front door. Fritz answered it, and a moment later ushered in our next visitor, a tall, slouching woman in her early 30s, with shoulder-length hair, the color of rust and a fox-like intensity that made you feel she was always 2 steps ahead, no matter how polite she acted. Camilla Dean. She came into the office as if she owned it, wearing a blue velvet coat and carrying a cigarette case like it was a trophy from a previous conquest. Mr. Wolfe, she said with a voice that belonged in a cabaret, I'm told you're poking around my aunt's affairs. That's inaccurate, Wolfe replied. Miss Avery is a concerned party. I am merely accommodating her request for clarity. She gave a small, mocking smile. Florence? That girl was half housemaid, half shadow. My aunt used to joke she knew more about the plumbing than the will. Did she? Wolfe asked mildly. Camilla shifted, sensing she'd stepped too far. Anita was dramatic, but also fair. She told me I would be included in the next draft of her will. She even said she planned to have a painting restored in my name. Which painting? Camilla hesitated. She didn't specify. She was vague. Then your claim is hearsay. Camilla bristled. What exactly are you accusing me of, Mr. Wolfe? Nothing. Yet. But you attempted to sell sapphires this afternoon. You claimed they were keepsakes. Can you prove they weren't stolen? Camilla went pale, and for a second I saw her hands clench around the cigarette case. They were a gift, she said tightly. From whom? She didn't answer. Instead, she stood. If you're looking for scandal, Mr. Wolfe, I assure you you'll find more of it in the art world than in my handbag. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting. She swept out. Wolfe didn't move. She's lying, he said. About the sapphires. About everything. I leaned back. What's the next step? Miss Avery, Wolfe said. Florence entered as if she'd been summoned by intuition. She'd changed clothes. Neat beige skirt and jacket. Plain as a butter knife, but impeccable. Miss Avery, Wolfe said. Was there anyone at all whom Mrs. Lovchin confided in, aside from you? Anyone who might have helped her hide something? Florence paused. There was a man, she said slowly. A visitor. Not often. Maybe 3 times a year. She never introduced him, but when he came she sent me out. Always said she didn't want gossip. I only saw him once from the window. He wore a charcoal coat and carried a leather tube, like for blueprints or artwork. Can you describe him? Middle height, mid-50s, gray hair, thick eyebrows, sharp nose, looked disappointed with the world. That was enough for Wolfe. He turned to me. Archie, get Saul. We need to find this man. He may be the key, and have Miss Dean followed more closely. She is volatile. He closed his eyes again. The pattern is forming, but we must be sure before I close the trap. I knew what that meant. The circle was tightening, and the brownstone, disturbed though it was becoming the stage on which the final act would play. I don't know what Wolfe dreams about, if he dreams at all, but I'd wager a fair sum it's never landscapes or long walks on beaches. More likely it's blueprints of mental architecture, mazes with only one exit, and puzzles where every piece clicks with an audible snap. And if that's true, then the man Florence Avery had glimpsed at Anita Lovechin's house, the one with the leather tube and disappointed face, had just dropped straight into Wolfe's subconscious like a final jigsaw piece. Saul showed up at 6:15 with a small folder, one bent corner, and that look he gets when he knows he's holding something valuable enough to make Wolfe forget his dinner schedule. He didn't say much, just nodded, handed over the file, and walked out again like a surgeon post-op. Wolfe opened the folder, adjusted his glasses, and began to hum. Not a melody, more like a low series of grunts, vaguely melodic, like someone muttering in Latin. His name, Wolfe said at last, is Walter Briggs, a restoration consultant and preservationist. He works independently and occasionally lectures at Columbia. No criminal record, but 2 civil disputes over artwork damaged in transit. He is, in other words, the kind of man who values art more than people. Which would make him perfect for Anita Lovechin, I added. Wolfe nodded. And importantly, he fits Miss Avery's description. Moreover, 3 of the paintings sold from her private collection over the last 2 years passed through his care. That is an intimacy greater than mere acquaintance. Which begs the question, I said. If he was trusted with her paintings, did she trust him enough to hide something else? Wolfe gave me a look. Go ask him. Briggs's address was listed as an apartment near Morningside Heights. I didn't wait till morning. The man had a habit of slipping through small cracks, and Wolfe didn't like cracks. I left Florence with Fritz. She didn't want to go home anyway, and caught a cab uptown. The building was pre-war, and snooty enough to make its own rules about visitor buzzers. The door person was a middle-aged woman in a tight bun and a tighter mood, but a smile and a fake name from the Department of Historical Preservation got me the Briggs apartment number. Penthouse 7. I knocked twice. A pause. Then the door opened halfway. Walter Briggs looked exactly like Florence had described him. Gray hair, charcoal sweater, horn-rimmed glasses, and a permanent frown creased into his face like a birthmark. Yes, Walter Briggs? I asked. Yes. Who are you? Archie Goodwin. I work for Nero Wolfe. That opened the door a little further. He didn't smile, but I could tell he was curious. I'm not here to accuse you of anything, I said. We're looking into the circumstances surrounding Anita Lovechin's death. Briggs sighed. Let me guess. Florence Avery thinks someone killed her. More or less. He let me in. The apartment was sparse and organized, like a museum curator's lunchroom. Clean walls, a few choice prints, and one oil painting half-wrapped on a table mid-restoration. He poured himself a drink but didn't offer me one. I took a seat on the edge of a Nîmes-style chair and waited. I knew Anita, he said finally. We had a complicated arrangement. She trusted me with her pieces because I understood them, and because I didn't ask too many questions. Did she ever ask you to store or conceal anything? He looked at me sideways. What kind of concealment? The valuable kind. A long silence. There was one item, he said slowly. 6 months ago, she brought me a painting and asked me to strip the frame, clean the backing, and her words ensure it disappears without being destroyed. Do you remember the piece? It was unsigned. A portrait. Something symbolic, stark. Eastern European, likely pre-war. She wouldn't let me photograph it. And where is it now? He hesitated again, then crossed the room and opened a cabinet behind his desk. Inside was a cylindrical leather case. She never came to retrieve it. he said. And I never reported it. I assumed it was a prelude to donation or insurance fraud. I stood and took a step forward. May I? He handed it over. I opened the tube. Inside, carefully rolled and protected, in rice paper, was a painting. Reclining figure, with veil. No signature, but unmistakably the work Wolfe had described. The one Paul Renner had claimed was delayed in transit. She said it was dangerous, Briggs murmured. Not the painting, the attention it would bring. She didn't want Renner to know it still existed. Why not? She believed he'd sell it the moment her back was turned. That he was scheming to take control of her estate. She was right. He raised an eyebrow. She's dead. The painting's missing. And Renner's been filing insurance inquiries to cover his tracks. Briggs sat back heavily. She asked me to hold it until she made changes to her will. She never said what those changes were. I tucked the case under my arm. She also never told anyone she trusted you. That, Mr. Briggs, might be what kept you out of danger. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting, yes, waiting for me in the office, his dinner cold on the tray next to him. Fritz looked ready to throw the tray through a wall. But Wolfe, once he saw the tube, dismissed culinary grievances entirely. He unrolled the painting on his desk and examined it for a long moment. It is, he said, both valuable and damning. This is the painting. No, he touched the canvas lightly, fingers gentle as a surgeon's. Then he nodded to me. Now we have the leverage. What's next? We summon Mr. Renner. He said it as if he were calling in a library fine. 20 minutes later, Paul Renner was in the red chair, sweat beading just under his hairline. He saw the painting on the table and tried not to look directly at it. I thought it was lost, he said. No, Wolfe replied. You hoped it was. You attempted to fabricate its disappearance to cover the theft you engineered. Renner shifted. I had nothing to do with it. Then why file an insurance claim? To protect the gallery. It was a contingency. You were lying. Prove it. Wolfe gestured toward the painting. It was found in the care of a man you did not know existed. Walter Briggs. Mrs. Lovechen entrusted it to him, not to you. And she did so because she suspected you would attempt to steal or manipulate her assets. Renner was cornered, and he knew it. His breathing changed, shallow, rapid. Do you accuse me of murder? I accuse you of orchestration, Wolfe said. You pressured her, possibly confronted her. She suffered a stress event, perhaps a genuine stroke. But you used it. You entered the house, removed the will, left behind the one favorable to you, and began circling the estate like a vulture. That's outrageous. No. It's obvious. And prosecutable. Renner stood. You have no proof. No, Wolfe said. But the police will. And Miss Avery will testify to every irregularity in the house, including your presence. And Mr. Briggs will explain the history of the painting. Renner's shoulders slumped. He turned and left without another word. Wolfe sat back. One more summons, he said. Tomorrow. All of them. The suspects. In this office. You're going to do it. Yes. I am going to bring the painting out in the open. And I am going to name the one who profited from its disappearance. And that, folks, meant the final curtain was drawing close. Wolfe was ready to strike. And this time I could see it. Clearly and without doubt. The killer hadn't counted on a maid who cleaned too well. By the time morning rolled around, the brownstone was running at full alert, which for Wolfe's fortress of routine meant that the phone rang twice instead of once. Fritz burned the eggs slightly, and Wolfe requested beer at 10:15, 90 minutes ahead of schedule. He was thinking hard, and when Wolfe thinks that early, somebody's about to get boiled alive in logic. I made the calls, one by one. Polite, formal, and as dry as a freshly ironed shirt. Paul Renner didn't argue. Camilla Dean said she was otherwise engaged, which I translated to sweating bullets, but confirmed. Walter Briggs asked if he should bring legal counsel. Wolfe said no, unless he wished to confess in writing, which would be more efficient. Florence Avery stayed upstairs in the guest room. reading a book about estate protocol like it was a thriller novel. She didn't come down for breakfast. She didn't ask questions. She didn't fidget. She was too still. At precisely 11 o'clock, they began to arrive. First was Renner. Trim, taut, nervous, in a pressed charcoal suit and the same lizard skin shoes from yesterday, which told me he had more money than sense. He gave me a tight nod and didn't ask to sit, just stood in the hall like a man waiting for dental surgery. Camilla came next. Blue silk blouse, high heels, sunglasses the size of dessert plates. She smelled like an expensive mistake and walked like she was stepping through smoke. Briggs followed, carrying nothing but the weight of his own conscience. When I offered him coffee, he took it with both hands and didn't say a word. Wolfe didn't come downstairs. Wolfe doesn't do that. They were seated, eventually in the office. Renner on the red chair, Camilla on the green divan, Briggs in the far corner, as if trying to uninvite himself. Florence sat by the globe in a straight-back chair, her expression unreadable, and then Wolfe entered, precisely at 11:30 in his brown suit and yellow shirt, with the bearing of a man about to level a building with his vocabulary. He sat. No greetings, no nods, just a pause. "Miss Avery," he said. "What was Mrs. Lovejoy's strongest trait?" Florence glanced at him. "Control." Indeed. She was not impulsive. She curated her life as she did her home, meticulously, and with purpose. She did not act without intent. Camilla scoffed. "That's not entirely true. She made erratic choices all the time." Wolfe looked at her. "Such as removing you from her will. That shut her up." "Let us be plain," Wolfe continued. "A painting was removed from Mrs. Lovejoy's study weeks before her death. A valuable one. Its existence was hidden. Its frame stripped. Its provenance obscured. Why? Because she no longer trusted her circle. That includes all of you." Renner shifted in his seat. "If this is an accusation—" "It is," Wolfe said smoothly. "But I prefer the term revelation. You see, I have the painting, and I have the man to whom it was entrusted." All heads turned toward Briggs. Briggs spoke softly. "She brought it to me to protect." She didn't say from whom, but she did say, "It should not reappear," Wolfe added. "Not until she had changed her legal arrangements." Camilla sat forward. "What legal arrangements?" Wolfe turned his gaze on her. "You were written out of her will in April. You visited her the following week. You were seen leaving her residence visibly upset. That is confirmed. She told me I was being selfish, that I didn't appreciate art. She said she was giving everything to a museum instead." "She was," Wolfe agreed, "until she reconsidered. She called her lawyer to revoke the last version of her will. That is not speculation. That is recorded in the firm's internal logbook. But the new draft, the one she mentioned retrieving the painting for, never surfaced." I stood, picked up the slim folder Wolfe had prepared and handed it to Camilla. "Read it," I said. "Page 2. She did. Then paled. "It names Florence." She whispered. "Yes," Wolfe said. "As the primary custodian of the remaining assets and executor of the sale of the painting, she was to see that the money went to the causes Mrs. Lovejoy supported. Not to the gallery, not to the niece, and certainly not to anyone who had tried to profit by deception." Renner stood. "That's absurd. A maid?" "No," Wolfe said. "A witness. One who understood the household's inner life better than any of you. One who knew the difference between a misplaced book and a staged death." Briggs finally spoke. "You mean to say you think she was killed?" "No," Wolfe said. "But I believe her death was used. When she collapsed, someone saw an opportunity. They took the real will, replaced it with an older draft, and ensured no one questioned it. A quiet death. No autopsy, no inquiry." "And how do you know who?" Camilla asked, lips tight. "I don't yet," Wolfe said, "but I know motive. I know who filed an insurance report before the painting could be declared missing. I know who visited the apartment more than once, after the death, under the guise of retrieving sentimental items. I raised a photo. It was grainy but clear enough. Paul Renner, entering the building 3 days after Anita's death with a key and no appointment. Renner's mouth dropped open. That proves nothing. It proves access, Wolfe said, and opportunity. Renner stood. You have no forensic proof. No, Wolfe said. But I have a statement from a security camera technician. You disabled the front-facing recording camera with a piece of painter's tape on the lens. Amateur, but effective. Until he noticed it the next morning. Briggs sighed. I thought she was paranoid. I thought she was overreacting. She was preparing, Florence said quietly. She knew someone would try. There was a long silence. Camilla looked away. Renner stayed standing, frozen, knowing it was over. Wolfe spoke last. This matter will now proceed through legal channels. I am not the law, but I am satisfied. The painting will be returned to the Lovechin estate under Miss Avery's oversight and sold as she intended. The proceeds will not benefit theft or manipulation. He turned to Florence. Your loyalty was undervalued, but not anymore. She didn't reply. Just gave a single short nod. Renner left in silence. Camilla followed, heels clicking like accusations. Briggs lingered. Will you report me? No, Wolfe said. But you will sign an affidavit, verifying your custody of the painting and your timeline. That is the price of neutrality. When they were all gone, Wolfe reclined at last. Archie. Yes, sir. You will arrange delivery of the painting through reputable hands and inform Inspector Kramer that a case is waiting for him should he wish to make headlines. Shall I offer him a beer? Offer him nothing. Let him earn his glory. Florence stood. Thank you, she said simply. Wolfe inclined his head. You clean too well. And thank goodness. She left, and the door clicked behind her. I looked at Wolfe. You going to say it? He closed his eyes. Human folly never surprises me, Archie. But sometimes human decency does. That was as close as Nero Wolfe ever got to a benediction. And with that, the brownstone exhaled. Dinner was served on time. It's a funny thing about quiet. When it finally returns to the brownstone after a case, it doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in, inch by inch, like a cat entering a room it doesn't trust. You can almost hear it testing the floorboards, sniffing the corners, and after a case like this one, where murder wasn't the method but manipulation was the weapon, it took even longer. The morning after the office gathering, I came downstairs to find Wolfe already at his desk, not reading, not drinking beer, just sitting, fingers steepled, eyes closed, head tilted slightly forward, like he was communing with one of the 7 minor gods of deduction. I gave him 10 seconds. Then you planning to move today, or just rely on telepathy? I am thinking, he said without opening his eyes. That's what I was afraid of. He exhaled. I am dissatisfied. That was worse than angry. Wolfe could live with anger. It was passionate, primal, and ultimately dismissible. But dissatisfaction, that stuck like gristle in his brain. With what? I asked. You caught the play-acting art dealer, unmasked a fake will, saved a priceless painting, and gave Florence Avery a reason to believe people like you exist outside fiction. What's left to be sour about? Wolfe's eyes opened, slow and deliberate. Renner did not kill Anita Lovechin. He may have exploited her death. He may have tampered with her papers, but he did not kill her. And I find that irritating. I folded my arms. We've been over this. There was no evidence of violence. No autopsy. No bruising, poison, or trauma. Everything points to a stroke or aneurysm. Kramer said it. The coroner signed it. And yet, Wolfe said, a woman who controlled her schedule down to the minute, who never allowed unannounced visitors, dies in her study with a book out of place, a drawer emptied, and a cup shattered on the floor, and we are to accept coincidence as the explanation. I sat. Wolfe, we got justice. The painting is back where it belongs. The will is being refiled. The crooks are cornered. What else are you looking for? The irritant, he murmured. The grain of sand that made the pearl. The phone rang. Fritz answered. He came into the office with that small crease above his nose that only appears when the call is from someone Wolfe would rather ignore. It's Miss Avery, he said. She says it's important. Wolfe nodded once. I picked up the receiver. Archie. Morning, Miss Avery. I need to come over. I found something. Something I missed before. I glanced at Wolfe. He gave a slight wave of assent. We're here. Bring it. 20 minutes later, she was on our doorstep, wearing the same gray coat from the day she first arrived. Only now, she looked different. The stiffness was gone. The posture was the same, but her face had softened, like someone who'd finally stopped holding her breath. She carried a manila envelope. I went back to the apartment, she said. The lawyer let me in. I asked for 1 hour to clean out my old closet. Not the rooms, just the small space they gave me. And? Wolfe asked. She handed him the envelope. Inside was a single page, folded, handwritten in Anita Lovejohn's slanted, aggressive script. Wolfe read it once, then twice. To be placed with new will. Instruct Florence to destroy if anything happens to me before signature. And below that, I believe someone is watching me. Inside the apartment. Not Renner. Someone else. Someone I've trusted. If I am wrong, let this be forgotten. If I am right, Florence will know what to do. There was no name, no signature, just those 2 sentences. Wolfe set the paper down. Miss Avery. Where was this? In a shoe, inside a hollowed heel. She used to keep her grandmother's ring in it. I never thought to look. And you are certain of the handwriting? Yes. She always looped the capital. I like that. See the curve? I leaned in. She was right. Wolfe didn't need convincing. He'd already filed the note into the slot in his mind marked significant. She says it wasn't Renner, I said. And it wasn't Camilla. So who? Wolfe stared at the note. She says someone I've trusted. Past tense. That excludes Miss Avery. That excludes Renner, who she openly disliked by the end. Florence stiffened. He barely came to the apartment. Yes, Wolfe said. But he knew the value of the painting. And he knew where it was hidden. Why tell us the truth now? Because the threat is gone? Or because he thought it was over? I stood. You want me to go back to him? No, Wolfe said. Bring him here. Briggs arrived within the hour. He looked tired. Hollow-eyed. The kind of tired that sleep won't fix. I thought this was concluded, he said quietly. So did we, I replied, guiding him into the office. Wolfe didn't bother with pleasantries. You saw her how often? 3 times in the last year. She was increasingly withdrawn, suspicious. Did she ever accuse you? No. But she changed the plan. She no longer wanted to donate the painting. She wanted to sell it, yes. Briggs nodded. She said the painting wasn't safe anymore. That someone would take it. She didn't say who. Mr. Briggs, Wolfe said, voice slow and heavy. Did you ever enter her apartment when she wasn't there? Briggs blinked. No, never. Wolfe opened the envelope. Slid out the note. Briggs didn't move. Then he said, She wrote that? Yes. Briggs exhaled. Long. I thought she'd stop trusting me. That's why I kept the painting hidden even after she died. I didn't want suspicion. You feared exposure. I feared misunderstanding. Wolfe nodded slowly. Then you have one final obligation. You will make a written declaration of your involvement in the painting's concealment, including dates, correspondence, and any financial arrangements. Then you are done. Briggs rose. Thank you. He paused at the door. I never meant her harm, but I did ignore her fear. That may have been the worst betrayal. When he was gone, Wolfe turned to me. She was right to to be afraid," he said. "Not of murder, but of erasure, of being used, misinterpreted, and ultimately overruled." I looked at the note. "So she didn't die by another's hand?" "No," Wolfe said. "But she died alone while being watched. That, Archie, is a different kind of violence." That night, the painting was delivered to the holding trust Florence had set up. Renner's assets were frozen pending a full investigation. Camilla Dean left the city. Walter Briggs disappeared into quiet obscurity. Florence stayed one more night in the guest room. As I passed by the stairs, she caught my arm. "She wasn't always kind," she said, "but she trusted me. That matters more." "It does," I said. "Especially in this house." She smiled once. Just once. Then went to bed. And finally, the brownstone was quiet. Until Wolfe asked me to bring him beer at midnight. I've always said that the last days of a case are like the last days of a house guest. Everyone's smiling, everyone's polite, but the chairs have shifted half an inch, and the walls want to breathe again. The brownstone isn't a hotel, and it sure as hell isn't a community center, and after a week of murder-adjacent mystery, inheritance mayhem, and an out-of-place painting worth more than a fleet of Cadillacs, Wolfe and I were both ready to reclaim the sanctity of our fortress of solitude. Florence Avery was scheduled to leave that afternoon. Not because we wanted her gone, but because she'd accomplished what she came to do. Get the truth seen, get the liars caught, and see that Anita Lovechin's name wouldn't be carved into marble by thieves. She was packed, composed, and sipping Fritz's final offering of lemon verbena tea like a woman who'd survived a war and wasn't interested in souvenirs. Wolfe didn't see her off. He doesn't do that either. But he did have Fritz pass along an envelope. Inside was a personal letter typed, not dictated, and a single orchid, pressed flat in glass. Florence didn't cry. Of course not. But she touched the glass like it was an old photograph and said thank you, in a voice as close to reverence as I've heard in this house. After she left, Wolfe didn't say much for a good hour. He sat in his chair, eyes closed, looking like he was meditating or napping or performing internal surgery with logic. I didn't interrupt. I knew the sign. But then, just as I was settling in with the paper and my second cup of coffee, he spoke. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Are you satisfied?" I raised a brow. "With what?" "With the outcome." "Sure." "The painting's back. The will is being honored. Renner's on ice. Camilla's gone. And Florence is heading into a quieter chapter. Seems like a win." Wolfe shook his head slightly. "The painting was not the fulcrum, nor was the will. Then what was?" "Fear." I leaned forward. "You mean Anita's?" "Exactly. Fear reshaped her final weeks. It dictated her secrecy, her distrust. It likely hastened her end. And while we did not fail to expose the opportunists, we arrived too late to provide her peace." That, coming from Wolfe, was practically a funeral sermon. I waited, but he said nothing more. I left him to it. Around 4 that afternoon, the doorbell rang. We weren't expecting anyone. No appointment, no summons. Fritz answered. A moment later he stepped into the office, looking uncharacteristically rattled. "There is someone to see you," he said. "But I do not know how to categorize her." That was new. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. "Age, 70 perhaps. Severe. Dressed as if for a funeral she's organizing, not attending. Name?" She gave none. "She may enter." A moment later she did. She walked like a woman used to rooms going quiet when she entered them. Her hair was snow white and combed into a sleek twist. Her suit was black silk, her gloves gray suede, and her expression said she had never been late for anything in her life, not even a mistake. She stood in front of Wolfe's desk, without waiting for an invitation. "You are Nero Wolfe," she said. It wasn't a question. I am Dr. Cecily Vaughan. I was Anita Lovechin's personal physician for 18 years. I was also her executor, until 2 months ago." Wolfe didn't move. "Indeed. I've come," she said crisply, "because I know what killed her. Silence. Then Wolfe gestured, almost lazily. Please. She remained standing. Anita had a congenital heart defect. Minor. It flared when she was stressed, particularly in the last year. I advised her repeatedly to reduce strain, to simplify her affairs. She did not listen. She rarely did, Wolfe murmured. I received word of her death the morning after it occurred. The cause, as recorded by the attending coroner, was myocardial infarction, aggravated by adrenaline. That is accurate. What is not recorded is the context. Explain. She called me 2 days before her death. Said she had done something irrevocable, that she expected consequences. She was frightened, but not apologetic. Wolfe nodded. The will. Likely. But she also mentioned someone. Someone who had made threats. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. She named them. No. But she said this person had been clever with kindness. That's a phrase I've only heard her use once before, about her second husband who tried to bankrupt her before dying in a boating accident he had arranged. Then you believe she felt hunted? I do, and I believe it contributed to her death. She reached into her bag and handed Wolfe a sealed letter. This arrived at my office the day after the funeral, postmarked the day before she died. It is addressed to whomever may try to twist the ending. I believe she meant you. Wolfe opened it slowly. I stepped around to read it too. The letter was brief, not quite a confession, not quite a riddle. If this reaches the right eyes, let it be known. I left nothing unsaid. I hid what I had to hide. If they try to distort me, they will find emptiness. I have put the truth in the smallest hands. That is enough. Wolfe folded the letter. She left it with Florence, he said quietly. Then she chose well, Dr. Vaughan replied. She turned and left without waiting for a dismissal. I stared at Wolfe. So that's it? He nodded once. That's it. It didn't feel like a final twist. Not quite, more like a benediction. We had our truth, not neat, not sealed, but real. That evening, Wolfe came to dinner in silence. Fritz served trout in lemon butter and a chilled Riesling. I waited until the second course before I asked, "So what's next?" He looked at me, mildly insulted. "We resume our schedule. Back to routine, huh?" "Precisely." I raised my glass to Florence Avery. The maid who cleaned too well. Wolfe didn't toast. He doesn't do that. But he did offer one final line before returning to his plate. She was not too clean, Archie, merely cleaner than the rest. And with that, the brownstone swallowed the story whole, like the world it always is, waiting for the next truth to knock on the door. The next day, New York went on being New York, with its horns and haste, its scandals and sidewalk steam, and not a soul on the sidewalk had the faintest clue that the final days of Anita Lovejohn had hinged on a drawer, a teacup, and a woman with a mop and a memory sharper than a lawyer's pen. That's how it always goes. The biggest truths never make headlines, they just settle quietly into place, like stones at the bottom of a river. As for us, we were back in sync. Wolfe had resumed his routine with the rigid fidelity of a Benedictine monk. Breakfast was precisely at 9. Lunch was a 3-course affair that left no room for questions, and the orchids, under his tender care, were thriving. No one had disturbed the hallowed peace of the brownstone for 2 days, and we were just starting to believe we might get through the week without another knock on the door from fate disguised as a client. Naturally. That's when Lon Cohen called. "Archie," he said, voice already laced with caffeine and suspicion. "Tell me something." "You'll have to be more specific," I said. "I've got a wealth of fascinating facts. What color shirt I'm wearing, what Fritz made for breakfast, whether Wolfe's in a bad mood. Take your pick." He wasn't amused. "I just got word from a guy I know at the DA's office. There's a sealed complaint being drafted against Paul Renner. Art fraud, will tampering, insurance fraud, maybe obstruction. Sounds like someone's got a busy weekend ahead of him." "Don't get smart, Archie." The name Nero Wolfe came up, quietly. But it's there. It always is, Lon. We're the ones who hand the DA their ribbon-wrapped gift, and then stand in the window waving as they take the credit. What did you uncover? I gave him a bare-bones version, enough to satisfy the journalist in him without violating Wolfe's rules about client privacy. When I got to the part about the hidden painting and the suspicious camera tampering, Lon whistled low. So Florence Avery wasn't just dusting baseboards. Nope. She was cataloging human behavior with more precision than a stenographer at a Senate hearing. Lone paused. She's still in town? No. She's in Connecticut with an aunt. Says she wants quiet and a room where no one rearranges the furniture. She'll get it. We're running a profile on her next week. Quiet heroine of the art world. Wolfe, sitting behind me with his eyes closed, grunted. No. No? She does not want fame, nor would it serve her. She's earned some recognition. She's earned dignity, Wolfe said. Let her keep it. I relayed the message to Lon, who cursed under his breath but didn't argue. That alone told me he respected Wolfe more than he let on. After I hung up, Wolfe opened one eye. Your loyalty to Miss Avery is commendable. I'd say the same about yours, I replied. She reminded me of someone, Wolfe murmured. I waited. No elaboration came. Wolfe doesn't traffic in sentiment unless he can disguise it as a philosophical observation. So I let it. The rest of the day was a slow burn of routine. I caught up on some case notes, filed away the folder marked Lovechin, Anita, estate deception, and sharpened pencils I probably wouldn't use. It was in every sense a decompression day, until 4:30. That's when a delivery came. Fritz accepted it, a small square package wrapped in brown paper and sealed with red wax. No name, no return address. But the moment I saw it, I knew. I carried it into Wolfe's office and placed it on his desk. He glanced at it, then met my eyes. From her, he asked. Her, he asked. Her, I nodded. He opened it, delicately. Inside was a framed photo. Sepia-toned, faded, but clear. Anita Lovechin and Florence Avery standing in the garden of the Riverside Drive apartment. Anita seated in a wicker chair, a book in one hand, and a stern, appraising gaze aimed at the camera. Florence standing behind her, not quite smiling, not quite solemn. Between them, a large vase of white orchids. There was a note tucked into the corner, for Mr. Wolfe, whose silence was louder than any newspaper headline. Wolfe said nothing. He studied the photograph for a long time. Then he placed it on the windowsill beside the small jade statue of Confucius he claimed to detest, but never removed. I presume this concludes the affair, he said finally. Until the next time a maid cleans too well, I replied. Wolfe almost smiled. Almost. That evening, dinner was lamb chops with rosemary and garlic, roasted fingerling potatoes, and haricots verts with lemon zest. Fritz was in excellent form, buoyed no doubt by the return of peace to the household. I was halfway through the second glass of Syrah when Wolfe set down his fork and dabbed his lips. Archie. Yes. This case will linger. How so? Because it was not about the crime. It was about the cracks that come before it. The ones no one seals until something falls through. You're getting poetic. I'm getting realistic, he said. We focus so often on the criminal act that we forget the thousand small selfishnesses that lead up to it. Renner did not kill Anita Lovechin, but he helped her die alone. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't say anything. After dinner, we retreated to our respective corners, Wolfe to his orchids, me to a well-worn detective novel that suddenly felt a lot less clever than it used to. Around 9:45, I heard the faint clink of a glass being set down in the office. I went to check. Wolfe was still at his desk, but he wasn't reading. He was staring out the window, watching the lights flicker across the street, the shadows stretch and retreat, watching the world go on. Exactly as it had before, minus one quiet woman, and a truth she hadn't lived long enough to see vindicated. You all right, boss? I asked. He didn't turn. But he spoke. She knew, he said. Before anyone else. She knew what was gone. What would be taken. She cleaned around the lies like dust on a shelf. I stepped back. That was enough for one night. As I reached the stairs, he added one more thing. A murmur, barely audible. She saw us all more clearly than we deserved. And there it was. The real ending. Not a reveal. Not a twist. Just a truth. Sitting where it belonged. Quiet, clean, and final. The morning after that last murmur from Wolfe, the kind of line he drops like a velvet anvil, when the case is in his mind, truly over. I came downstairs early. Not on purpose, but had one of those restless nights where your dreams feel like they're being directed by a noir screenwriter with a mean streak. When I finally gave up on sleep, it was still gray outside and the city was wrapped in that rarest of New York luxuries, silence. Wolfe was already in the plant rooms. That in itself was nothing special. He usually devoted the early hours to his orchids, communing with them in a language even Fritz and I never tried to translate, but this time, he stayed longer than usual. He didn't emerge for lunch. And when I poked my head in around 1 o'clock, he was still there, pinching a bloom like it had personally offended him. "You going to eat?" I asked. "Or just interrogate the Cattleya tribe until they confess?" He didn't turn. "I am reflecting." That made me blink. "On what?" He sighed. One of those deep diaphragmatic sighs that comes from the place where Wolfe keeps his disappointments with humanity. "On Florence." I didn't need him to say more. The image of her in that gray coat, back straight, face calm, holding a house together with a rag and a moral compass. It had stayed with me too. She hadn't just cleaned, she'd catalogued, observed, noticed things most of us shrug off, and she'd carried a dead woman's last wishes further than most heirs carry living ones. "You thinking of hiring her?" I joked. "No," he said. "But I regret her absence." That was practically a marriage proposal from Wolfe. Back in the office, I decided to put the case to bed the only way I knew how. I opened the filing cabinet and pulled out the Lovechin folder. It was thicker than most. Testimonies, photos, notes from Saul, scribbled pages in Florence's tidy handwriting, printouts of insurance records, a blurry still from the security footage of Renner entering the apartment building. I added Wolfe's final note to the DA's office and slid it into the front. But I hesitated before filing it away. "Wolfe," I said, "what do you think Florence does next?" He was seated again now, having returned from the orchids like a general from the front. "She will not return to domestic work." "You sound sure." "She has acquired a taste for moral responsibility. That is a hunger not easily forgotten." I grinned. "You saying she'll open her own agency?" "No. She will find something quieter, but meaningful. Perhaps a role in estate oversight, a watchdog for the dead." I chuckled. "The ghost's accountant." Wolfe's mouth twitched. Just then the doorbell rang. Fritz answered. He returned with a crisp envelope, cream-colored, unmarked, except for a tiny silver-pressed monogram. It had been forwarded. Wolfe opened it slowly. Inside was a single note on fine stationery. "To Mr. Wolfe and Mr. Goodwin, if you're reading this, then Florence has done what I hoped she would. I always said she cleaned too well. I meant it. She cleaned the rot I'd grown blind to. You both gave me a strange kind of justice, and I thank you for it, wherever I am. Now, please do me one final courtesy. Never forget that the smallest eyes see the biggest things." A.A. Wolfe said nothing. He handed the note to me, and for once we didn't frame it in sarcasm or toss it in the shred pile. We kept it. That evening, Inspector Kramer came by. He doesn't do that often. He prefers his snarls over the phone, where his cigar smoke doesn't get cancelled out by Fritz's ventilation system. But this time he came in person. Wolfe didn't rise. He never does, but he did motion Kramer to the yellow chair, which he usually reserves for people he doesn't trust but doesn't want to insult. Kramer took the seat like a man lowering himself into a trap. "I've read the affidavit," he said. "The Briggs timeline checks out. Renner's going to be indicted on a handful of felonies, mostly paper crimes, but they'll stick. Wolfe said nothing. I still don't like it. Kramer added. What specifically? Wolfe asked. That she died without us knowing the whole picture. You never do, Wolfe replied. That is the nature of death. It ends the narrative before the final page. Kramer grunted. Philosophy. Great. You know what I wanted to do? Wolfe raised a brow. I wanted to find a broken window, a bloody shoe print, a bottle of pills, something I could pin. But all I got was a quiet apartment and a bunch of half-truths. Then, Wolfe said, you got exactly what she lived in. That made Kramer pause. He stood. Well, you got your win, Wolfe. Don't get too comfortable. The city's not short on rot. Wolfe actually nodded. And may it never be. Otherwise I would be unemployed. Kramer gave me a glance on the way out. Tell your boss to shave once in a while. Sure thing, I said, right after you start smiling in your badge photo. He left. The night returned. We had trout with mustard dill sauce, rice pilaf, and an Austrian white I couldn't pronounce but could appreciate. Wolfe spoke little. He was digesting more than food. After dinner, I found myself in the office again, flicking through the files, and just as I was about to shut it down for good, I noticed something odd. One of the papers Florence had written her notes on. A simple sheet, folded over. Nothing special, but on the back, in the corner, was a small sketch. A quick pencil outline of an orchid. It wasn't good. It wasn't even recognizable, but it was hers. A private signature. The kind people make without thinking. I left it there. I shut the drawer. Wolfe came in behind me. Archie. Yes? She left her mark. On the paper. No? On us. And just like that, the case was truly closed. Not with a bang, not with handcuffs or headlines, but with a sketch, a silence, and the memory of a maid who cleaned too well and saw what no one else dared look at. The world kept turning outside, but the brownstone for the moment was still, just as it should be. It was 2 days after Inspector Kramer's visit, and the brownstone had sunk into the kind of tranquility that Wolfe treats like a precious vintage, to be uncorked only under exacting circumstances, never hurried, never wasted. The Lovechin case had been put to bed, the files closed, the last letter read, but I'd been around Wolfe long enough to know that a case doesn't really end when the last suspect exits the office. Not for him. It ends when he says it does, and that hadn't happened yet. That morning, Fritz served poached eggs with paprika and a side of sautéed spinach. Wolfe gave a nod of approval before retreating to the plant rooms. I lingered at the table, reading the paper, expecting a quiet day. Instead, at 11:03 a.m., Wolfe summoned me with one of his famous bell taps. I walked into the office, expecting a small errand. Instead, I got a final reckoning. Archie, he said, not looking up from his chair. Call Florence Avery. I blinked. I thought you said she needed peace. She does, but not without this. He reached into the drawer and pulled out the last page from Florence's notes. The one with the rough orchid sketch I'd noticed a few nights earlier. He passed it to me. She left this deliberately, he said. It was not absent-minded doodling. It was her message. I studied the drawing again. A rough sketch of an orchid, badly formed. Yes, but not random. On closer inspection, the bloom wasn't just an orchid. It was our orchid, a replica of the hybrid Wolfe himself had named 5 years earlier, Cycropedium wolfenum, a particularly rare specimen from his private cross-pollination experiment. She saw it in the plant room, I said. Yes, and she copied it from memory. Poorly, but with intent. And why? Because she was telling me, Wolfe said, that she knew the difference. Between what and what? Between artifice and care. I sat down. Boss, I know you're leading up to something, but you might need to pull the curtain all the way back for me. He closed his eyes briefly. Florence Avery knew Anita Lovechin was being watched. Not just physically, but psychologically. She knew that Rena was pressing her, but she also knew, intuitively, that Lovechen didn't fear Rena the most. I frowned. You think someone else pushed her over the edge? No, Wolfe said softly. I think she pushed herself, but not without help. Emotional sabotage, Archie, can be as lethal as poison. And the person who dealt that kind of sabotage best was Anita herself. That stopped me. She drove away Camilla. She pushed Rena to the brink of fraud. She dismissed Avery's concerns. She didn't trust Briggs. She prepared for betrayal because she anticipated it, but never addressed the source, her own inability to relinquish control. Even in death, she arranged things to test people. I shook my head. Then what was Florence's role in the end? She passed the test, Wolfe said, by not claiming anything, not asserting ownership. She preserved what mattered, and did so without expectation. I leaned back. You're saying the case wasn't about murder, it was about legacy? Yes, he said. Anita Lovechen died because her fear outpaced her trust. And Florence Avery became the only person in her life to act without trying to reshape her. That is why she was left the truth. I sat there a moment, watching Wolfe as he tilted his head toward the afternoon sunlight coming through the window. It struck him just below the chin, making him look like something carved out of patient marble. I'll call her, I said. He nodded once. Thank her. And tell her the orchid she drew now hangs in the orchid room. Properly labeled. You framed it. I preserved it. I smiled. That's high praise from you. It is acknowledgement, he said. Praise would require perfection, but dignity that she had. That afternoon, I made the call. Florence didn't say much, just listened. When I told her about the sketch, about the orchid being framed and hung beside the real thing, she went quiet. Then she said, she always wanted to be surrounded by beauty, but she only ever noticed it when it was gone. I didn't have a reply for that. I don't think anyone would. After I hung up, I returned to the office. Wolfe was sitting comfortably, sipping beer, a volume of Montaigne open on his lap. So I said, that's it? Yes. No loose ends. No. Merely lessons. He picked up his glass. To truth, unadorned, unheralded, and almost always inconvenient. I raised my own glass of cold sarsaparilla. To the maid who cleaned too well. He nodded once. And better than most men ever did. And with that, the final note of the case, subtle, quiet, and perfectly in tune, faded into the air of the brownstone. Just as it should. Just as it